Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 10 of Book 3, which looks at the question of, it's kind of like continuing of the question of who should be the ruling part of the regime, who should be ruling. It continues the discussion of regime that we looked at, or the politeia, that we began in the last couple of chapters. So let's start by going right into it, right? There is a question as to what the authoritative ruling keros element of the city polis should be. Is it now? This is the question. This is going to be a dispute. Is it either the multitude, the wealthy, the respectable, the one who is best of all, or the tyrant? Whoa, 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 whoa! I noticed something here. We originally had six claims. We had the argument of the regime back in a couple there. We go back into I think chapter 7, where let's see if I'm right. Let's go back and look. Yeah, chapter 7, where we had the discussion of the advantage or disadvantage, and then we had the discussion of the six types of regimes, right? The one, the few, the many, the kingship, tyranny, aristocracy, oligarchy, politeia called politeia, and democracy, right? He then shows how oligarchy and democracy, just this discussion here about these regimes, this kind of collapses, deconstructs in that sense, and this continues the deconstruction by showing that what really is about regimes are about their way of life, and it's more than simply just the question of number. Well, the number will be important, but it's not going to be the definitive answer. It's accidental. The specific conception of justice is going to be the thing, right? And he argues against what the city is and what it's a community of, right? And it's not merely an association. The attack on kind of what we call the Lockean, Hobbesian, or social contract view, or the modern view. In other words, Aristotle knew what the modern political, although he's responding to a sophist of Lacophon who no one really knows. We have very little thing. There's someone, I think there was a Hackett, the liberal temper of Greek politics, back in the 50s and early 60s, where a book mentions these sophists, mostly using Aristotle's account to kind of show that how there are. That there is this liberal temper, as Havelock would call it, of the sophists, right? And where Aristotle just dismisses that. That's not really a city. That's not really a koinonia in a true sense. Now let's continue here about the authoritative element. Is not six. Notice this, not six. It's one, the multitude; the two, the wealthy; three, the respectable; and the one who is best of all, the best one; and the tyrant. Now, who's missing? Well, the argument of king based on lineage of family, the paternal, that I'm the king, he's my son, I'm the king because I'm the father of this. Remember, the earlier conception of kings emerged out of tribal leaders, and therefore heads of tribal leader, the head of the father. Therefore, kingship and fatherhood are connected in this paternal conception of paternal authority. Right? This is something Filmer will talk about, but even Aristotle points to that too, right? That this is connected. That the kings emerge out of heads of households, right? Out of the fact that clans and tribes emerge out of heads of households. Um, um, Silent here. The other one that's silent here is politeia, the regime politeia. And the question is, all these are. Now, this argument is that every one of these claims are happening about who should be the authoritative element in a politeia. So therefore, all these claims are within a structure of a politeia. Hence, why the claim of paternal rule of the king is not mentioned, but tyranny is, the tyrant. So we have the multitude, the people, the wealthy. Notice not the wealthy, the respectable, the one who is best of all, and the tyrant. So those are the five. But all of these appear to involve difficulties. All, not just one. All of these people, there was who should rule. All of these respect difficulties. And how could they not? If the poor, what is this? Not the multitude, but the poor, the a prior, by the fact of being the majority, distribute among uh, 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 themselves the things of the wealthy. Is this not unjust? Now, that's the famous claim of. See what happened. That is a very important part. This is the wealthy speaking. Is it not unjust that the poor? Now, notice that there's different voices here. Aristotle kind of plays a little kind of dialogue. This chapter is many ways a dialogue of the different claimants. We have five voices here. And the first voice that speaks is the oligarch, perhaps, or maybe even the aristocrat or the just man, in that sense. That what happens is that the argument is there not something wrong with the poor taking the things, the redistribution of things of the wealthy? Is this not unjust, right? By Zeus, it was resolved in a just fashion by those in authority. Again, this is the Democrat responding to that. That no, it was just by a just authority. So therefore, all of a sudden, someone complains about the Democrat. Who'd complain about the Democrat? Wouldn't be the tyrant. Tyrant has no problem taking the things of others. The only people who might have a problem with that would be the oligarch and the respectable and the one who is simply best. The one who is best of all. This is we don't know which one is saying that. But then here, by Zeus, it was resolved in a just fashion by those in authority, those who are ruling. That is the claim. That's the response. That's the question. What then ought one say is the extreme injustice? Wait, then what ought one to say is extreme injustice? Again, taking all the citizens into consideration, if the majority distributes itself among the things of the minority, it is evident that will destroy the city, right? That's the claim. In other words, there's another problem that if the majority acts in the name, remember, we have to take consideration of the whole, not just only the majority. A community consists of the majority and the minority. If these are not, if they don't see each other with affection or see themselves as one, but rather two, then the city falls apart. That's the beginning of stasis, or factional conflict or conflict. The second that the parts don't see each other as brothers or as fellow sharers, but rather as separate things whose utility and interest don't share, and that they oppose each other or they're harming each other. They no longer have affection for each other anymore. This leads to, and they see each other as rivals, to the point of that they are enemies. In fact, the enemies, they're no longer friends but enemies. This becomes the basis of stasis, right? And that this is injustice, right? The injustice of this is the taking of something. So therefore, the question here is, okay, if we take all citizens of consideration, if the majority takes the things of the minority, is it evident that will destroy this? Is it evident that it will destroy the city? Well, that's a question in a sense, right? Is it? It is. It is evident, or the person who's saying this is making the claim that it would do this. So that's actually very important to understand. That's not the question. There is this kind of idea here. This is what he'll talk about in Book 5 about the reason for political change and revolution, in a sense, right? Yet it's certainly not virtue, arete, excellence, arete, right, that destroys the element possessing it. In other words, the idea of virtue doesn't destroy the element, or does it? Nor is justice destructive of a city, or is it? So it is clear that this law cannot be just. So that, again, this is an argument. Someone clearly, I think the oligarch or the aristocrat, someone like that, is saying this. Someone who is challenging the people. So there's a dialogue going on. It looks like there's five claimants to rule, and there's two voices so far. The dialogue between a Democrat and someone, the non-Democrat. Um, 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 and the question then has become what? It's not virtue, right? Taking them. If the point of this is that you have to understand the common advantage, and the common is the whole, not the a thing. If the majority takes the minority, is this not just? It will not lead to the breakdown of the city. It's not virtue. Virtue doesn't harm things. But that's again, I think that's an assertion. It's not Aristotle necessarily. I think virtue. He will say this. When we get to book 5, one of the causes of stasis or conflict in a city might be virtue. In other words, that one part sees itself virtuous and has contempt for the other part, and that this leads to a situation not of fellow feeling, but of a resentment and or just not. I mean contempt, which then leads that other group feels the contempt being laid at them, and that leads to resentment, and that leads to conflict. Right. I think this is what's interesting about Aristotle. Aristotle gives us a systematic understanding. When we get to book 5, Aristotle gives us a systemic understanding of what leads to political conflict, the various forces that do it, okay, in a way that's holistic, but yet at the same time particularistic. So that's a very interesting thing to look at. And it's presented, the thrust of this is in this debate that, okay, but then the city is not virtue. It's certainly not virtue that that destroys the element possessing it, nor justice destructive of the city, right? So it's clear that this law cannot be just. Further, on such an assumption, any actions carried out by a tyrant unnecessarily. In other words, if you follow your logic, Mr. Democrat up here, in other words, remember that claim up here, this claim right here. Any actions carried out by a tyrant aren't necessarily just. He is superior and uses force, like the multitude with respect to the wealthy. So, therefore, wait a minute. So, therefore, this whole point here, from here onwards, from 2 and 3, is the response to this person. So, there's 3 points. The first point is the first voice charging the multitude as being unjust in their action. The multitude's response, as I know, is done legitimately. And here is the response against the multitude, right? But it is just, therefore, for the minority and the wealthy to rule. Is it just? But is it just, therefore, for the minority and the wealthy to rule? If they act in the same way and rob and plunder the possessions of the multitude, is it just? Now, what is this? Okay, this voice comes in here. Is it the minority? Is it just for the minority and the wealthy to rule? They act the same way and robbed and plundered. So therefore, this is the first voice is the multitude. This is the multitude. The first one we don't know. Is it the that or that? The question is the minority and the wealthy. They act in the same way like the tyrant and rob and plunder the possessions of the multitude. Is this just? If so, the other is as well. In other words, you can't complain. If this is just, if the oligarchs and the wealthy rule just, then the others as well, tyranny and that. So I suspect maybe this is the aristocrat speaking. Could be. It could be the multitude, or it could be the aristocrat, or the respectable, the one that's best, or the respectable one, right? That is, all of these things are bad and unjust. That all of these things then is evident. Okay, again, I think this is like um, the next person. This is either the respectable or the one that's best of all. But now this one. But should the respectable. Now this is 46. Peteke, or that is gentlemen aristocrats. This is this is these people, the gentlemen's or the aristocrats' role, episteke. and have authority over all matters. Now, should they rule on matters? I think in this case, all the others are necessary, deprived of the prerogatives, since they are not honored by attaining political offices. In other words, all the rest are. For we say that offices are honors, right? And when the same person always rules, the others are necessary, deprived of those honors or prerogatives. Now, the argument here depends on technical use of etimoi, literally those without honor, to designate person judicially deprived of certain prerogatives of citizenship. I love this line because this is actually etimoi, the literally judicially deprived of honor. Um, in other words, we say the offices and honors are not going to be able to do it because if only they're respectable, then you know, they will only hold office, right? And then if others are deprived of it, right? Um, and that's not that's going to have problems, right? But is it better for the one who is, in other words, I think this is a challenge by someone against the respectable, the gentleman. Could be by the oligarch, could be by the multitude. I think by the multitude most likely, because here this is an argument of equality. That if they have it, then everyone gets excluded, and that's going to be problematic. But is it better for the one who is most excellent to rule? Right? Now this is a challenge even more so. But this is even more oligarchic, as more deprived of prerogative. So therefore, this is an anti aristocratic and anti oligarchic. But here is that this is even more oligarchic. So therefore, the one who is best of all, or the best, the rule of the best one, is more oligarchic, the claim is, than the rule of the respectable. And the rule of the respectable is like rule of the wealthy. There's a connection in one sense between the rule of the wealthy. The rule of the wealthy are simply the ones who have the most money. The rule of the respectable are good birth. In other words, a question of good birth and and somewhat good character, right? The idea that good birth leads to good character. The next one is the one who's best, the idea of merit, right? Meritocracy. And this is more, and we can see this a little bit in the world today. The post idea in the 1980s, late 1960s and 1980s, the American universities wanted to be more oligarchic. They looked at the Ivy Leagues and things like that and said, "Oh, this is too much insiders of old families. We need Harvard and Yale and those places. We're kind of regional schools in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Oh, no, 40s and 50s and the mid 60s. They were just regional schools, the Ivy League schools. They were just the children of the Pratt boys and the people, the people who went there regionally. And it was that not, it's not really considered like the, but in the late 1960s, early 70s, these schools started to seek to bring in best talent. All schools, the elite schools, compete schools, decided to go for, instead of just going out for looking to recruit the alumni and local elites, they sought to get talent, and they became competitive regarding who they sought. And they often did not recruit. They often stopped recruiting or accepting children of alumni and started to take people who weren't alumni but whose scores were better and came from things. In other words, they actively sought to create talent. And this argument is talent. Talent became the thing. But talent, this creates even more oligarchy. As someone like, Charles Murray and his, starting with even bell curve. Now, people misread bell curve. They think it's about race, but it's not. It's in bell curve is, his recent book, not recent, but a decade ago, Coming Apart of White America, is basically bell curve. It's saying, I was right. And what is he right about? It's about mate selection. Women will not marry people usually dumber than they do. Men will marry people less quality. See, women are, because they're going to have children and have to care for their children, are going to try to pick the better mate. That's natural. This is mate selection. This is how natural selection works in human beings. In other words, The male, the woman the woman who's going to be stuck with the child, who's going to have to bear the child and have to deal with the child's initial stages of life, are looking at mates and saying, "Well, no, I want the better one. I want the one who's they're going to have not only the better genes and the better characteristics, but also the better means for me, me and my child to survive." Okay, so I'm not going to pick the one. Now, you can say some ignorant women do this. They pick Bobby, who's cool. Again, again, this is the idea of this is a subject. Every actor is subjectively understanding what they think is best. That's always our point. Everyone believes that they're doing is best, and that therefore the actor may be not acting on complete information or incorrect assumptions about what best means. And therefore, what happens here in mate selection is interesting. Men will often marry people below their status. Women don't. Women tend not to. Because, but this woman does. Again, in a statistical pool, tends to mean, does not mean all. It means the vast majority or the significant pattern of behavior will lead to this way. Men tend to marry below status. Women tend to marry above status. And because of this, what happens with once you have elite selection at university, what ends up happening is that's where you met your mates mostly, university. In fact, that was the joke in the old school for women going to school, the MRS degree, right? That was the old 1940s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s joke. You went to university to find a husband, right? That's the joke. And the feminist was, oh, a horrible idea, we should become that degree. But no, that was the purpose. The fact that most people did find their mate, particularly the middle class, the idea of the college bound middle class that happened after World War II, after the GIs came back. If you didn't meet your mate in high school or some social structure within that, work, going to church, your community, your neighborhood, your community, these, you didn't, it was, if in other words, school, high school, and then university, these, and then late, maybe even work, but less so because work tended to be sexually divided. That's why doctors and nurses and lawyers and secretaries, office work. In other words, there was this work did do have some. There was some workforces that had merger, but the typical working class workforce didn't. They were sexually divided in that sense. Um, why am I talking about this? Because this is the point I think Aristotle's hinting at here, that the one that is best becomes the aristocratic, meritocratic things is oligarchic ultimately. It produces a very much oligarchic outcome because why? As he says, uh, as more are deprived of prerogatives, the right to rule and right to say things. I'm sorry I went on a long discussion about this, but I think this is important to understand. Because we think meritocracy will produce equality. No, meritocracy may actually produce inequality, massive inequality. In fact, what really produces inequality, this is something that I was looking at, The Great Level. There's a good book by, oh God, Walter Schindler, I think it's Schindler, I'm probably saying his name wrong, called The Great Leveler. This is a couple of years old now, but it's a great book because it explains that what really led to the greater equality within Europe was the black things like the Black Death and war. In other words, the population shrank, and therefore as populations were decimated, what happened was the value of every individual person became more important, and the ones who survived and the remainers, their value went up. It's a supply demand problem. Human labor, human value is time and supply and demand. If there's a huge amount of labor, the value of labor goes down. If the labor pool, in other words, if there's a huge pool of people laboring, then the value of a laborer goes down. Supply equals demand. The more supply, if in other words, supply on to demand. If there's a demand, if demand is constant and supply is increased dramatically, then the value, the cost of, or the value of demand, value of the labor goes. If now that however, if what happens is the demand increases and the volume increases, then the value can stay the same or maybe slightly. If demand increases and the labor volume doesn't change, then the value goes up, right? What happens when the value shrinks but the supply stays the same? Then the labor goes down again. Okay, so this is the supply demand reality. The cost of anything, the cost of supply and the cost of labor. If the cost of labor outstrips, this is the reality of this. So therefore, you apply this to meritocracy and apply this to equality. In other words, that if there's a huge population, there's going to be not necessarily equality, but maybe the large population will end up producing mass inequality. Because what happens is the big, large populations, everyone's value will differentiate and vary. Some people have more, be valued more, and other people be valued much less. Whereas in a smaller scale community, there is much more likely to have equality. We can say, well, there was some small scale, there's the bosses and the not bosses, right? Yeah, that's true. There's always going to be some level of inequality, but the distance between those and hate to say this, the old-fashioned local aristocrats and the old even slave masters in the bad old days of slavery were closer to those who they ruled in terms of that they lived mostly in the same conditions, but slightly better, maybe one degree better, versus today where the difference between rich and poor are like almost different races. What happened is the problem is this is the problem of in a situation called subs. We see this ecologically or biologically in the concept of subspeciation, that the differences are so big between something that was at one time the same group or same species or the same organism becomes so vast that they almost have nothing in common, may even not even be able to reproduce with each other anymore. And that they become two separate things and hate each other. Now, that's why, read Stanley Kim Robinson's The Mars Trilogy to have a good example of how that will happen because of life expectancy. That what happens when the very wealthy, because of chemicals and technology, are able to live 200, 300 years, where the poor just die out. And assuming that what's going to happen is the rich are going to have all sorts of abilities to their lives are going to be substantively so different than that of the poor that they're not really the same species anymore. They will not breed. This is what Murray was kind of pointing out in the bell curve. And I think this is what the danger of this, and I think Aristotle kind of understood this implicitly about the danger. This was being discussed here, the danger of the idea that the merit alone is going to do it. Merit alone can be a problem, okay? So let's continue. I'm sorry for my little move away from this, but I wanted to connect this point. One might perhaps assert, however, that it is bad for the authoritative element generally to be a man instead of law. Okay, I think this is the Democrat making this argument. At any rate, he has passions that results from being human in his soul. But if law may be oligarchic or democratic, what the difference will it make with regard to the question that has been raised? For what was said before will result in the same. In other words, this is the argument against the laws, that the laws are not autonomous. In other words, here's the argument, and I think made by the Democrat for the rule of law, or the multitude, the idea that the law should rule, or maybe even done by the respectable too. That perhaps one should assert instead for the authoritative element generally to be merely man, rather law, because men have passion, and law is kind of like reason without passion, right? But he says that again, law is not law. All law is kind of relative to the regime or dependent upon the regime. In other words, the laws, that's that relationship between law. Law is tied to the regime. That the law of the city is always tied to the regime, in this sense. So that if the law be oligarchy or democratic, what difference it will make to this question? Because why? Who should rule? In other words, the question of who should rule that we started, because it will the result will be the same as what was that was before here. If it's the minority, if the majority or the people that they'll take it from majority, if they'll rule in their favor. If the minority rules, there will be their problem. In other words, we don't escape this. The argument is that we don't escape this, and there has to be another argument. And this is where the chapter 11 ends with these five voices coming out, and these five voices ultimately become two: an argument for the best and the argument for the Democrat. And we'll see this, uh, 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 and the argument for the multitude, and no, sorry, the argument for the best and the argument for the multitude, the one who is best and the multitude. Because the argument of the other wealthy should be I'm the best, right? The same multitude, I'm the best. And all the three other claims as I'm the best, and the multitude's argument is that no, yeah, it's an arbitrary view. You're not really best. We're all equal. Okay, that's the whole point. Therefore, the five become the five. Okay, the tyrant is silent. The tyrant, no one, this tyranny never made. I rule because I have force. That is the argument of Thrasymachus of the Republic, Book 1. Those who have the power rule. That is silent. The tyrant never made, in this debate, tyranny never says. But there's a reasonableness. There's a truth in tyrant's argument. That even they argue that, what do you think an authoritative element is? It rules. It means it has the power. It doesn't make it. Tyranny never makes a claim, but the implicit argument of what the whole argument is that who has power? Well, the one who has power has the power. One who rules. Uh, uh, um, the tyrant is silent. The tyrant never speaks. Now, the argument is that, well, tyranny ought not to be allowed to speak because tyranny. How dare the tyrant make an argument? That would be shocking if the tyrant made the argument. But the tyrant's argument is implicit here. The tyrant argument is implicit, and it's there. It's hidden. It's hidden right there in the text. It's mentioned. He's not ignored. He's mentioned as one of the voices. It's a silent voice, but it's still the silence. It's present even in the just question of who should rule, who should have authority, who should have power. And I said, they're ruling. What does ruling mean? Exercising authority, exercising what? Exercising decision. How do they do it? They have power. And the question of, well, they mention the tyrant as, oh, he's going to act like a coercive through coercion. Well, he has to, if he's going to act coercively, he must have the ability to coerce. And here the majority and the minority are said to be like coercive. But even and there's a kind of argument that the respectable has an element of coercion by denying the ability to deny the others to have the offices. Okay, that okay, you have to every ruling part must have some ability to impose or to execute its rule. Okay, that is why it's a very interesting. In other words, this is a point where the argument is conspicuous by its absence. Using that phenomenon of the famous joke about the Straussians, that how many Straussians does it take to turn a light bulb? The answer is none, because the light bulb is conspicuous by its absence. Right? This is a Strauss line. Something is conspicuous by its absence, and the argument of the tyrant is conspicuous by its absence, and that is implied here. That there's something that this is where something Machiavelli boldly says. Aristotle is a little hesitant. Is not going to boldly go say it at this point. He will say similar things a little more boldly later. But here, when the question of political philosophy and justice is up here, perhaps it's not pretty to say such things, or not beautiful, or noble, or kalos, right? So this is where we end. I'm sorry if I took a little longer than I was planning on doing. If you like any questions or points you want to raise, please, or questions, or things you want to raise, please put them below, and if I see them, I'll answer them. If you have, if you liked it, liked it. If you didn't like it, don't like it. Um, um, but say why. It would help. If you're gonna criticize, you should say I don't like it. Why? That'd be interesting. Um, pardon. Um, if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. You get notifications this way. I also want to build the channel. You get your friends to subscribe. You can follow me on social media. Those who wish to follow me on social media, you can follow me below. And the links are listed there. I'm going to now shill a little bit, so please forgive me. This is cost. Doing this is kind of costing now more because of the way YouTube is storing videos. I'm at 50%, and it's going to be. I'm going to do more. I'm going to have the new series on Montesquieu and in the spring. We'll probably do it by February. I think maybe not. Maybe March when it gets on the first one. But I'm heading towards it. It depends on I'm gonna try to get as much of the. I'm gonna get all the politics done. That's gonna take a long while. I might get these recorded faster. Maybe not. We'll see what happens. Um, and Therefore, this is going to be the size of the videos in the storage area on for which I store the video on for YouTube. Now, this is something I do like this. I said if I had a Patreon or something in the old days, I wish I had someone pay me a bunch of money that can do this continually. Um, but that's what I do. So therefore, you can help. If you want to help, you can do Patreon. Again, Patreon or subscribe. I understand people aren't doing this. I'm not. See, I'm giving this. I'm not going to create special things in Patreon like this. I'm not going to do something because a lot of people do these special things. They create and then become slaves of the patronage. You want to help, please. That's what I would say. Or you can just, if you don't want to do that, you can just buy my book. Buy Lulu, I get a little more money because Lulu will give me the share that Amazon and other publishers that you buy from them take from themselves. Um, but It's this why this book. This is a book about politics, the Aristotle's politics. It's not a commentary. It's not a summary per se. It's Cliff's notes, but it's a notebook for Aristotle's politics. It's a study guide. It helps you go through it. I've talked about it before in other videos. Um, if you want to help and you don't want to do those other things, you can do that. Well, that's it. Again, we're going to do chapter 11 our next session. Well, take care and have a good day. Bye bye.